Okay, and everyone should have just gotten a notification, but we just started recording this too. We can send this out to folks who can't make it.
Excellent. Well, why don't we start, and hopefully Andrew can find us, and if Jay, you want to keep trying to help him in the background. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, cool. Well, welcome everybody to the Dataset Providers Alliance's first ever webinar. As Jay mentioned, we're recording this call. A little bit on logistics, so apologies, we're a few minutes late. We're going to do about a 45-minute panel discussion, give or take. We'll leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. The audience will be able to, you will all be able to send questions via Google Meet that will be answered during that last 50 minutes. And Jay will help us manage that. Okay, so a little bit about the DPA. The Dataset Providers Alliance brings together a diverse range of AI licensing providers and intellectual property owners, including those specializing in music, voice, text, video, and images. By establishing a unified voice for dataset providers, the Alliance advocates for the interests of rights holders and works to create a sustainable and equitable ecosystem for the licensing of intellectual property content in the AI and ML industries. You can learn more about the DPA's members on our website, thedpa.ai. And if you need to reach out to us, please submit the contact form on that website. There's lots happening in AI. We plan to host events like this roughly every quarter to discuss the most pressing issues in AI and data licensing. One quick caveat before we dive in. If anybody's looking for this to be sort of the source of the big legal and ethical debate about whether copyrighted works should be licensed, this isn't that webinar. The Dataset Provider Alliance has a view on that and believes it's very much on the side of data licensing. So fair warning that this panel is likely going to reflect that point of view, but just acknowledging there is a different point of view held by very smart people and plenty of venues for them to express that view. All right, so let me dive into introductions. First, I'll talk about myself just for a second. I'm going to be moderating today. I'm Dave Davis. I'm General Manager of Protege Media for a company called Protege. Protege aggregates content to license to AI companies, specializing in both audio-visual data sets as well as health data sets. My background is I spent a lot of time in places like movie studios. Before I turn to the panelists, just to note that we had hoped to have Ed Newton-Rex on. Unexpectedly, he could not attend at the last minute, unavoidably detained, as they say. We did get a great last-minute addition in Engy Ziedan. Why don't I start with Engy and let you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Engy. I'm a principal scientist at Protege. I'm also an applied health economist, so I'm a professor at Tulane University. I don't create content using imaging and video, but predict things like survival. But I'm excited to be here regardless and talk about models and data.
Great. And then just working around my screen, Andrew, you're next. And welcome, Andrew.
Hello, thanks for having me today. I'm Andrew Steinberg. I'm Senior Director of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships at Gannett. You may know us for USA Today Network, hundreds of local papers, as well as NewsQuest in the UK. I focus on making sure we're engaging and actively trying to participate in the developing AI licensing space.
Awesome. Paul?
Yeah, hi everyone. Paul Melcher here. Thank you, DPA, for inviting me to speak today. I spent over the last 2 decades at the intersection of content licensing and technology and creativity, with an emphasis on technology, I would say. I've built and eventually sold businesses in the content licensing business as well, one to Getty Images. Since 2016, I've been actively involved with AI, working with the first companies doing some auto tagging work and machine learning work at that. Also on the side of content licensing as well. And for the last 3 years, I've been working with the strategic partnership team at Bria, a fantastic B2B Gen AI company that does incredible visual tools, working with content partners for ethical gathering of data for training.
No, fantastic. And Luke.
Hey, thanks for having me. My name is Luke Neumann. I'm a CEO and founder of a company called Overlai. I am a filmmaker at heart. I got started on YouTube in the early days of YouTube, helped video blocks, now story blocks, kind of scale up their business as a kind of chief content creator. And then really got started on content licensing by doing really high resolution 8K, 12K resolution video data. So got into the tech space with Overlai as kind of like protecting creators' rights. So I have a little foot in that door, and then a foot in the content licensing door, just on that really high quality 8K, 12K side.
No, fantastic. Well, it's great to have you all here. Thanks for your time. Let's start with the basics, and I'll start with Engy. Engy, can you just explain what licensed data for AI model training is and how it's used?
Yeah, sure. So licensed data is basically data that is legally curated for building, training, post-training, or fine-tuning in any machine learning, deep learning, or AI setting. And so since the audience here is majority interested in video and imaging data, you can think of it as film, TV, images, whether labeled or not, where a model would learn to form patterns, recognize characteristics, and as we move on and on into the future, actually create de novo content on its own, right? So become your own agent, makes your own movie or your own series, and maybe even incorporate your own characters. So that's the gist of AI training data that's kind of legally curated to protect intellectual property.
No, great. And then for video models, Engy, do you have a sense today? My sense is a lot of the learning is just about what objects look like and sort of letting the models understand that. Are models starting to learn actual reasoning for video models?
So I can't comment so much on the details in this panel, but I'll give maybe from like a very high level probability theory class I took a very long time ago when I was in grad school. It always starts with transitivity. And so the way I explain it to my husband is you're teaching the model the way you would teach a child. And so when you teach a child, you would show them a table and you'd say, this is a table. And then they'd go to Dave's house and they would see an upside down table and they would recognize that that is also a table, right? And so it's the variety of the content and the representation that has been shown. Actually, most models in AI mimic a lot of the biology of the human brain. There's been a debate about whether we should build models this way or not. But if you think of neurons, synapses, and brain regions, it's very similar to the way we think of nodes, the way we think of weights, the way we think of model layers. And that debate has taken further, like maybe context, and now we're thinking about how to make models better, how to get them to reason. And some have suggested that one way to make models better is obviously to improve training data. Another way to make models better is to train on bigger compute. And another way is just algorithmic performance by making the model more complex. Though there is debate there, some think that the future has simpler models in it. Some think the future has more complex models in it. But yeah, that is kind of the gist of where we think it may be going, that instead of just sight, where models today can just identify a ball or a flower in a video, it leads to insight. It knows where it is, and it can generate insight about where it's going.
Oh, fantastic. Paul, talk a little bit about at Bria how you use licensed training data there.
So at Bria, we've trained our own model, completely trained on licensed data. The first, well, actually, we're about to release version 3.0, is entirely made of still images for a moment. We are currently working on our video model, which will be released in probably the next quarter. But the first model is entirely around still images. So it does a variety of things. Bria is a B2B company, so it solves immediate business issues with using generative AI. So think of it as your creative assistant on steroids, allowing you to edit images with one click. You can replace and remove backgrounds. The backgrounds can be AI generated and fill in appropriately with the appropriate shadows and lighting and things like that. You can transform or change the models, the expressions, even the ethnicity of the model, all the way down to, we've just released a couple of weeks ago, tailored training where our customers can, by uploading as little as 5 of their proprietary content, have the AI generate brand specific content, if you want to say so, or character specific content. So it works for brands that have their characters, as well as animation studios or gaming companies or things like that that can really scale thanks to the technology. So that's what Bria is doing for them.
Very cool. All right, Luke. I alluded to it up front, but there's a great debate. There's a view among a lot of the people that we work with that publicly available data, anything publicly available, is fair game and should be considered fair use under U.S. law for AI model training. Without going into legal arguments, why do you believe licensing content in the context of AI model training is important?
So, just my perspective as a filmmaker, as a creator, I think the best data going forward will probably come from working hand in hand with creators of that data, right? So you're not going to do that if you don't pay people. And so I think licensing the content and starting to work with creators and artists is going to yield some of the best data. And I use a story to kind of talk about this. Like, we have a creator going out to shoot polar bears. If that creator was just going to upload something to their social media or to their personal website, they'd be snapping 2,000 pictures to get that perfect shot of the bear. If they're doing it for AI training, they would get a shot of the backside of the bear, something you'd never really think to do if you're out in the field. But if you're doing it for this specific use case, you would be capturing data in that way. So I think starting to put scientists and creators together will start to close the gap on, like, what do you need to make the better model? We can go out and do that. We can go out and capture that stuff. And I'd be interested to hear more opinions on that, but that's kind of where I stand.
Yeah, no, I see Engy smiling about that. That's great. Andrew, why is this context? A lot of people say, well, listen, AI is really no different than an author or a painter. They've, read some books, they've listened to some, musicians listen to some music, a painter's, viewed some paintings, and then they've been influenced by that. Why do you think this context is different for generative AI?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. I think one of the things I try to talk about in my discussions with folks has been an example I like to lean on as a concept of a book report or a term paper. So a student in an educational framework, they go and learn about a topic, they take in various forms of information, various sources, they synthesize information and come to a set of conclusions. And that ultimately produces a final product. The final product will reference sources, citations. There's a set of standards and frameworks for creating, a bibliography that can be used to verify against plagiarism or copyright. And the student knows they shouldn't be copying material and not citing it. Therefore, there'll be potential consequences for those actions. And so, additionally, this example above, that I'm talking about is not in the framework of a commercial exercise. This is the interpretation and sharing of information that has been commonplace and accepted. And the AI training process works differently. Companies incorporate vast amounts of source material into these training data sets, typically without a framework for attribution or acknowledgement of the original content. And I think in the research context, this is not totally unexpected, but I think we all recognize now that commercial application of the technology is the key goal.
Yeah, thank you. Luke, there's a lot of discussions in this world when we're talking about public data about opt-ins and opt-outs. Can you discuss your thoughts on that and specifically what Overlay's approach is?
Yeah. So I think everybody here would probably agree that opt-in will be the best for everyone, for artists at least, creators, dataset providers. It'll be the best solution. But I think it's very unlikely that there will be a universal standard to this, right? And so at Overlay, we've kind of started to prepare for that, I guess, worst case scenario. Like, what does it look like going forward? If everything that's been uploaded previously is fair use, that doesn't mean everything going forward needs to be fair use, right? And what does that look like? So we've started to build tools that we think make sense, or at least would hold up in court. We've seen some things fall apart because like a machine readable opt-out isn't visible enough or widely adopted enough. So we're a part of the C2PA, just trying to build out a system that would be like something artists could feel okay using to get that opt-out recognized as widely as possible. But I think everybody here would hope opt-in works. So I'm always championing Ed Newton Rex and his push for that. But at the end of the day, I think we need to prepare for if that doesn't happen.
Can you, Luke, I'm going to jump around the agenda a little bit, but can you talk a little bit about C2PA? That might be something that people haven't come across before.
Yeah, so the C2PA is a standards body. The steering members are Google, Adobe, Sony. They've started to build a metadata standard that it's been adopted by OpenAI. So if you're on LinkedIn and you'll see, every once in a while, you'll see a picture uploaded that has this CR logo on it. You can click on that and you can see it came from OpenAI or it came from Adobe Firefly. A lot of these companies are assigning this metadata to the generative AI outputs so that when it gets uploaded to social media, you can know for sure that this was generated by AI. The other side of it that we're kind of focusing on that's I'd say pretty underdeveloped is to be able to prove that something's human generated and coming from a camera. So a couple of camera companies have adopted this. Leica and Sony have both come out with the ability to apply content credentials at the point of capture. We're actually working on a mobile solution. So if you take something with our app through a mobile camera, it can be compatible with YouTube and get this camera captured tag. So YouTube's trying to break it down to like it's either camera captured or it's AI generated. But they're really, it's getting some good adoption among some big companies and they're starting to roll it out, just not as much as we'd like to see on the content creation side.
All right, thank you. Well, let's turn to some, business strategy and market trends. Andrew, I'll start with you on the news side. The news side has been incredibly active with high-profile AI licensing deals. I think there's been more than 20 announced in the past 18 months. How are you seeing that market for licensed data evolve from your perch at Gannett? And do you feel it's growing or contracting?
So since I joined Gannett, which was back in April 2024, I think we've seen a pretty significant evolution in the licensing agreements. And I think the big thing we're seeing is the market's moving beyond the simple one-to-one training deals now, and they're becoming more sophisticated partnerships that are going to integrate both a technical and a product collaboration. And I think some of the key shifts we've really seen have been about expanding use cases like RAG. So for folks at retrieval augmented generation, also seeing, summarization come out of that, content grounding, then also model fine tuning. I think the other kind of big shift we've seen is that the high quality content's commercial value in the system development is becoming more and more recognized. And then also for us in the news space, I think, reducing AI hallucinations through access to authenticated and structured information is something that folks are starting to really see a value around. And so I think even just for us, the recent developments validate the trend. So in the last 3 months, there's been multiple AI-centric tech platforms that have partnered with news providers, including Gannett. We did a collaboration with Microsoft for their Copilot Daily offering, which was announced in October. And with the proliferation of AI-generated content that mimics but doesn't match authentic journalism, trusted sources like Gannett, we produce billions of tokens of grammatically correct, factual content at a local, national, international level. We see that as becoming increasingly valuable and unbiased as well as a big part of it also.
No, great. I'm gonna go. Engy, I'll put you on the spot, but Andrew mentioned RAG, and maybe I think probably most of the people on this call probably have a pretty good sense of RAG, but maybe you could explain that.
Yeah, so it basically is the model's ability to go and kind of retrieve context that is related to the question or the prompt. And that allows models to be up to date. So it can almost read on behalf of you the news and obtain information or read a research paper. The interesting part here is it couples the ability of search, right? So to be able to retrieve and search with the ability to have in-context learning and put things in context and summarize them using the language model's ability to give you better perspective. So it's almost like a double benefit. And I think that is one of the most useful things people use chat models for. They're not interested in past as much as they're interested in like what should I do if I go to Tokyo next month, and things like that.
No, great. Paul, going back to the evolution of the licensed data market, I think Bria is most active in the images space. What are you seeing there?
In the image space specifically?
Yeah. First, kind of the evolution of the market for images and media as Bria is looking at it.
Well, first I want to follow up on what Luke was saying. Bria is also
Sure.
applying C2PA manifest or metadata to their images as well. Well, so it's and again to pick up on what Luke was saying. So originally, when we started licensing content for training, which is about two and a half years ago, the collection of available data, for lack of a better word, to talk about photography was stock photography mostly or entirely, with well crafted images and nice looking and well lit and things like that, which obviously was not a bad thing, but it also, we were lacking additional information like the back of the bear, to be able to train properly, like Engy was explaining, to fully train a model to really understand all aspects of an object or situation as well. So we see that changing, and we see new collections or more in the way that the outtakes of photographers and even video now, people are starting to plunge into their outtakes and say, well, maybe that's not good for the traditional licensing space, but it's certainly more valuable for the AI training spaces. So those things are coming up, and that's the biggest evolution I've seen in the last year or last 6 months to that. Yeah.
Okay, and then Bria, Paul, staying with you. Bria made a commercial judgment to use licensed data. Talk a little bit about that decision and that strategy and why that's beneficial.
So it was an ethical decision at first, which became a critical commercial decision as well. But at the foundation, Bria is an ethical company. The founder, Yair, is someone who actually, one of our first hires was a VP of ethics who's on board, and whose role is to make sure that everything we do, including sales messaging and marketing and obviously the tools, is ethically correct. So obviously the next step was to make sure that we did the right things, the right process with copyright owners, and instead of waiting for legislation to fall on one side or the other, or even lawsuits and to decide in one way or the other, we decided we're going to do the right thing immediately and say, okay, we're going to ask for permission to use content, and then second, we're going to compensate creators and rights owner for the right to do so, because we feel that it's the right thing to do, and we've done that since the beginning. We do it in a rather simple way, and it's mimicking models that exist like traditional licensing or even things like Spotify. Basically, without going into much details, we have an attribution system that is capable of seeing and reading which files are being used to influence the results of an operation, and we give a revenue share to the copyright owner or rights owner of that file. So it's an automated process that happens 1 million times a month, and then we pay off on a quarterly basis all the data partners that we have, and I think it's really important for the health of the system, and it's proven to be very valuable on a commercial side, because companies, especially big ones, and especially in the United States where liabilities can go to unlimited heights, are concerned about using the Midjourneys or other companies because the training data is unclear, the legislation unclear, and they don't want to open the door to potential liabilities that might hit them really, really hard. So they're extremely happy to be able to use Bria for 2 reasons. One, because they're protected against any liability, and also because there's a good side of it. They're actually contributing to paying off contributors so they can keep on creating more content and so on. So there's a good feeling about it as well.
Yeah, no, that's really great, and that's a great answer and covers a lot of ground. I think the attribution-based pricing model or compensation model is really interesting, and I think the commercial success you've had, because we've heard that, I've heard that in a lot of quarters, that A lot of enterprise customers get nervous about using models unless they know things are reasonably buttoned up. Let's turn to synthetic data. That's a big topic of conversation. And I'll start with Luke. How do you see the synthetic data? Do you see it as a complement to or a competitor with licensed data sets right now?
I'm pretty all in on the organic side of things. But I'm very curious to hear other opinions on this because I don't know a ton, but I think there's something to be said for like pulling the real world in and at least using that as the first layer. I think it could probably work and probably does as a second and third layer, but I think at the end you're going to have to come back to a camera's interpretation of the real world for a certain amount of time, right? So I'm very curious to hear other opinions though, because I'm not an expert.
All right, let's send it to Engy. What do you think? Synthetic versus licensed data and how they coexist or compete.
So I think that there are definitely use cases for synthetic data. I mean, we've seen autonomous vehicles trained on synthetic footage simply because of shortage in footage, interactions between a human being and a large truck or a tree falling on a car. Early on in my career, when I started to do some research in healthcare, people would say, would you like to buy synthetic data? And for us, it was so scary. It's like, how can you overlay human behavior that's synthetic? But really what they're saying is, we have this data corpus. We're going to give you a version or replicate it, multiply it, and maintain the distribution. And there are sophisticated companies out there that does this maintain the distribution bit very, very well. So they will like almost do Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and then expand the data set based on so there's always true data. The synthetic data doesn't come from vacuum. It comes from people who've created data as well. So in a way, they should also be appropriately, recognized for creating synthetic data. Where we've seen synthetic data fail is if you continue to train on synthetic data, it's always easier in mathematics, I guess, to make a prediction in the middle of the distribution. The tails are always noisy, right? And so the quality of the synthetic data may be highest for modal things. And so you train on the modal, but then you overtrain on the modal becomes more modal, which leads to really skewing models. And kind of like niche examples almost disappear over generations. That's also been one of the dangers of overly using synthetic data. But I think for smaller startups that are just starting, synthetic data can be more affordable. It's a start, like we encourage students to use it. In the middle between, I like that term, organic data or not synthetic data, and synthetic data, there is differential privacy, which is you take a data set and you change some aspects of it, or you blur some aspects of it, so it is quasi-synthetic, that we have also seen being used.
Well, thank you very much. That's great. Andrew, I'll give you kind of a general question. What are some of the biggest surprises or challenges you've encountered working in this space?
So for me, I'd say for goal for 2024, and I know from talking to you, some of y'all separately, and Dave, we've known each other for a long time. My goal for 2024, before I even started at Gannett, was to, I'm going to use my favorite air quotes thing here, was to be conversant in the AI landscape. But I think conversant has proven to be a moving target. I think the absolute velocity of innovation, it's unlike anything I've seen, in the 20 years that I've worked somewhere between media, entertainment, and technology. Beyond drinking from a fire hose, I think that's what AI, developments feel like trying to track right now. And so the facts of seeing new products, new models, new companies feature, every single day, even with obviously the excitement of this weekend, I don't think anybody can keep up with what's happening in the space. So for me, it's trying to take that and share information and learn from other peers. Everyone's kind of at a different stage on these kind of things. And so I think it's, just trying to help create a little bit of a collective understanding, that keeps us all kind of oriented, because it's easy to get pulled in a bunch of different places. And then Luke just invented a new term for us to use of organic data versus, synthetic data, which I will be stealing. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. I'm gonna open that up for to the floor. So just, I think it's a good general question. Big surprises and challenges that you've all seen in this space, for anybody who wants to chime in. or I'll move on if nobody wants to talk.
Is the question about challenges in the space?
Yeah, just unexpected, surprises, challenges you've encountered working in AI generally over the last couple of years.
Sure, I think maybe I can go ahead. I think I was surprised as to, maybe not so surprised, but how scarce data really is. That while, we say this all the time, data is plenty, the internet is vast, but then we get requests at Protege on a daily basis, and we kind of have to scratch our heads and think, this data may not actually exist, or it is very, very rare to find. And I think as we move more and more into agentic tools, finding the right multimodal data on individuals or places is becoming very, very hard.
Yeah, if I can jump on that, I think that's been one of the biggest hurdle or challenge that I've faced. And when we talk about biases, there's also biases that are invisible or somewhere invisible. So we know about the most common ones or the most known about, if you type in a CEO, you get an old white guy, things like that. But working with Bria, I've discovered a lot of more hidden biases. For example, the one I use all the time is kitchens, right? We have a good amount of photographs of very nice kitchens, taken clean kitchens, organized kitchens, because it's taken for real estate purposes or stock photography. And it's mostly 90% European, Western kitchens that corresponds to our ideal view of the kitchen. There's no pictures of your kitchen or my kitchen or kitchens in India or kitchens in or Japan or Africa or other places like that. So we have a very skewed, limited view of how kitchens look like and AIs in general. And this is not just an issue with Bria. You can try it on other generators as well. You'll find out that kitchens, when you try to generate a kitchen, it's always going to be nice and clean and pretty much new and a European looking kitchen. So that's the challenge. It's the lack of data and the lack of objective data, I would say, where there's not a point of view or specific point of view or things. That's yes.
Yeah, no, I've heard similar. I remember talking to a model building company months ago that said that they'd done a lot of business with stock photography, and their model over-indexed to smiling people who were perfectly lit. So they needed people who were unhappy and who weren't perfectly lit. So yeah, no, that's all good points. Take it back to kind of the C2PA side before we move off of this topic. And Luke, I'll turn to you. Are there other emerging technologies or innovations in data management and protection that you see that are exciting in the space?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we need to totally abandon copyright at this point, either. So we got copyright kind of leading the way for now. We got C2PA, which is looking to kind of fill that gap in the more machine readable space that is at this AI level. And then I wouldn't say a competing one, but the IPTC is another group that's developed some standards along the way. And with Overlai, we kind of stack all those because we think, one of those may win out, one of them may not, two of them might. So we think the best thing for data owners and creators is to stack those things up and use any available protection they have.
I'm great. Engy, many of the licensing deals announced don't specify what the data is used for, pre-training or post-training. And I'm not very conversant in that. But do you feel that licensed data is better used for one or the other?
I think most of the deals, at least at Protege, that we license data for, have asked to use data to build, train, in post-training, pre-training. Today, there's a new term with very little literature, mid-training, and there's fine-tuning. And so we don't really stipulate that, but what our data partners ask of us mainly is that to kind of borders around the use cases. So to explicitly state whether this will be an open source model or a closed source, and what the use cases will be. A lot of the data that Protege licenses is healthcare data. And so there is the intellectual property, but there is also like the ethical use of medical records. And actually, early on when we started the company, we started something called Deal Desk, where we would sit and kind of talk about, do we think this use case is something that we want to help with, or do we think it's a use case that we just want to pass on? And I found that incredibly interesting as a health economist, of course, because economists think about value, not just in terms of ethics, but also monetary. So yeah, I don't think that people stipulate pre or post training, though the requirement itself differs a lot. So in pre-training, using vast amounts of data, really general, you're basically feeding the model with as much data as possible. In fine-tuning type exercises, you have a specific training goal, a task. It could be, generate ads for a motorbike company, or like a vehicle-related video production, or it could be something like stage cancer in breast cancer females. So the data type tends to differ a lot. Though today we are seeing people who have pre-training intentions want to add specific data to help with fine-tuning later on in the chain. It raises the quality of the models later on in the chain.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll wrap up a couple of wrap-up questions, and this is for everybody. Looking ahead, what do you think the licensed data landscape will look like in, say, 5 years? Will it become the industry standard for AI training, or will it remain one option among many? So licensed versus unlicensed data.
I can go give a shot. I think licensed data is going to remain, likely one option among, many. And I think Engy kind of touched on synthetic for certain cases or different, kind of needs. But I think, when I came back from CES, I think just the sheer volume of data that's going to be needed to power the thousands of new consumer and enterprise AI products. Luke and I spoke this morning, particularly for physical world AI applications, is just not going to stop. I saw recently I saw a tweet that said that they had a prediction about TV and film studios being able to sell multi-angle footage packages to AI companies, and be able to highlight the creative approaches that might be emerging. So maybe we'll start to see more industry specific, very niche data license strategies. But I think there'll be plenty of healthy market if some of the stuff at CES comes to bear, especially with agents and robots.
Great. Who else has some thoughts on that?
I mean, I have very broad thoughts. Coming from the creator economy, I feel like if social media is going to continue to be used as a source for data, then you either have to prioritize the algorithm to put that stuff on the top so that human creators can continue to get that distribution that they rely on social media for. You can't allow, generative content to come in and flood the algorithm as it has the ability to do. So I think moving forward, I think licensed stuff will be kind of at the top for the best data. And then for the underlying stuff, I think we have to be able to prove what's real and what's not, and then kind of prioritize that on social media. And then that will continue to maybe be unlicensed stuff. But there will be a limit to what you can do with that, I think.
Great. Thanks, Luke. Any other thoughts on that, or I'll give one final question.
Yeah, just to add that it's gonna really be in function of what the legislation falls on in both the United States and Asia and Europe, obviously. And so a lot of the future of licensed data will hinge on where that happens. So keep an eye on that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, it's kind of the last point. So the Dataset Providers Alliance is all about creating a sustainable ecosystem. What can we all do to better create a sustainable ecosystem for licensed data, and thinking about things like standardization and so on? Maybe I'll start with Luke on that one.
Yeah, I think working together is a big thing. So just what you guys are doing here is important, kind of having a unified approach in how we go about this, because I don't think we're the Goliath in this story. So I think it's big to just continue to do things like this and continue to work together to standardize some of this stuff where we can, but also just keep in communication, keep a unified front.
Paul, Engy, Andrew, more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Definitely, but at the same time, standardization goes with flexibility. I think it's like we were saying at the beginning of this call. There's so much going on, and it's evolving so fast. The technology, the solutions, so that creating standards at a point where the whole environment is still evolving can be dangerous and blocking for either side of the equation. So there needs to be a lot of openness and like Andrew is doing, like research and being able to be flexible in different matters until we get to a point maybe one day where everything's stabilized, which we might not, and then fixing more solid rules. But communication is key, and I think things like you guys are doing with the DPA and inviting companies like Bria or others into the conversation as well is key to having a healthy development on that side.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, just piggybacking on that, the need to share information proactively. I can't stress it enough. And I think it's being not just open about the public information we see, but opportunities, evaluating the potential partnerships, connecting peers who might create valuable synergies. For Gannett, I try to talk to everybody that I can, from small startups to large foundational model companies. And if it's not right for us, I will happily make the introductions where it's appropriate. I think Paul talked about you got to be flexible. I think with the strategy, I think there's a lot of nuance to the licensing agreements too, as we try to figure out how to kind of bifurcate on rights and what makes sense. And so I think we just have to also keep supporting each other, because also you have the legal and regulatory going on. So share information, make introductions, help each other out, I think is a huge part of it. And what you all are doing in the DPA, I think is a great part of that.
No, great. All right. I think we're to the Q&A period now. So Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you. Maybe introduce yourself to the crowd and let's go.
Hey everyone, I am Jay. I am a founding member of the DPA with Dave and some other folks on the call. I am a consultant for a company called Addo in the AI licensing space. I work on both the buy and the sell side. Cool. So I have some questions here for everyone who's on the call. If you want to drop any questions you have in the chat, we can get to them, but that's the way we'll field them here. Is I'll read the questions as they come through and sort of pass them along to everyone. Cool. So the first question we have is about DeepSeek, because they've been in the news big time this week. This might be a good question for Engy. How do DeepSeek's advancements in reasoning, specifically making models smaller, impact the licensing space?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk and stock market fluctuations because of DeepSeek. Just to kind of put it forward, this is not the first DeepSeek model. So DeepSeek R1 is kind of the reasoning model that they put forward, which is trained on fewer chips, so less compute. And it is said to have beaten some proprietary closed models in math and in reasoning. Without mentioning names, I haven't actually looked at the paper that carefully with the statistics. That being said, the model is trained or learns from a base of a Llama open source model, which is itself trained on a lot of pre-training data and content. So I think the jury is still out as to whether this means that we need smaller models or less compute. How exactly, there's even questions as to, in the paper, really DeepSeek used the minimal compute they claim they have used. And so there's a lot still to be investigated and learned from the paper and as we kind of use the model over time. But I don't think that hinders the need for licensed data. The trajectory we're moving into is getting AI to do very specific tasks, sometimes even high-risk tasks. And that means data is curated very carefully. That means it's not just web-crawled public data, but proprietary data that's licensed with intent. And I think that's the direction that we're moving in. Like in healthcare, we are no longer seeing asks for, give me 270 med-QA questions. It's more like, I'd like someone's RNA, actually. And so there, licensing is extreme, is that you have to have patient consent and hospital licensing and so on. And I think in video and imaging, it will be more and more that you're looking for sophisticated data assets.
Super interesting. Sounds a little bit scary too, though. Okay, cool. So the next one we have is for smaller data providers. Can I still monetize via AI licensing, or do I need a really big data set to be taken seriously by these AI companies? Well, that might be a good question for you to start.
Sure. By the way, DeepSeek's AI generator is really bad. It looks like DALL-E version 1, I think. So it's good in text, but for images, it's not there yet. It's a numbers game, right? So I mean, the way we see it at Bria, and I'm going to be very, very selfish about that, is the attribution model. Obviously, the more you have images, the more likely they're going to be used as reference, and the more you're going to generate revenue. However, with that said, it is impossible to say in advance what people are going to use the generator to do. So if you have specialized collections of content which nobody else has, then that could perform as well, even though you don't have a large volume of content. So the answer is yes for both. And I think that's where people like Dave or Luke or people or Andrew that have an interface between AI companies and providers or content creators, by having a variety of conversation and talking to different size AI companies, depending on their needs, when we're talking about pre-training, post-training, or things like that, then a small data set can be extremely valuable for somebody compared to millions or 100 millions of things. So the short answer is everything is valuable. You just have to find the right pairing to make that happen.
Cool, thank you. And then the last question we have for now, there might be some others who come through in the chat. But that is, a year from now, if we are doing another one of these webinars, what do you guys think that we're going to be talking about then?
We might just all be digital avatars here with our voices recorded through 11 labs or something, maybe.
Whatever we predict today, we'd be wrong anyways. So it's a trap.
I think one thing I think about a lot that I kind of think about, maybe we can talk about in the next few months or the next year, is like validation data sets for imaging and video. In contexts like healthcare, you have this like out of sample cohort that is protected. You know that you're validating on a set that hasn't been seen by the model. A question I ask myself a lot when it comes to video and imaging is like, how do they prevent basically validating on a snippet of this video or image that has already been trained on, right? And I think the role of gated content here is pivotal because it kind of protects that data from entering in pre-training. But so much of media is out there and available that I think it hinders a lot of the validation efforts. And I think about that a lot.
Yeah, and that would get into like, data set providers starting to think about keeping their data offline, and until things are a bit more ironed out. So that's what we've kind of tried to do, is like focus on content that isn't out there and not on stock media sites and not on YouTube. And it's a smaller data set, right? So if you have a smaller data set, it's like try to pivot into fine tuning and talk to model providers and figure out where some of those gaps are with fine tuning, and work with creators to build data sets that fill those gaps. I think is an interesting, I don't know if that'll be a year, but it seems like an interesting thing to explore on our side.
Cool, looks like that's all we have. So I just want to say thank you very much to everyone for joining. Thanks so much to the panelists for participating. This was super insightful. And of course, thanks to Dave for hosting this too. As a follow-up, we're going to send out information on how to follow Dave and each of the panelists here in case you want to, I don't know if you guys are active on LinkedIn, X, wherever it is, but, more information on all of these folks, we'll make sure to send your way.
Yeah, and thanks to Jay also, who really helped to drive this. And thanks to Alex, lastly, who's really the driving force behind DPA. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Cool.
for having us.
Thank you.
Have a good one.